This is Tom Kane, the voice of Yoda in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Some call it a force and claim to use it. But we know the thread is not a power you wield.
I want to show them what you taught me. Please let me take the test.
Mother Anastasia, you cannot deny that Jedi have the right to test potential Padawans. With your permission, of course. In this test, you must divine what images appear on the testing screen. Tell us what you see.
A spaceship. Where am I?
We are on our way to Coruscant.
What happened?
They started a fire.
This is Ashley Eckstein, Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi. It is time once again to break down episodes of Star Wars The Acolyte, the Disney Plus series. We are on episode 3, and just like last week, I've got to bring in a super smart, super charming guest, and that is the one and only James Burns from Jedi News. James, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for being my co-pilot on The Acolyte.
Absolute pleasure. There's no other person I would rather be doing this with.
Hey, absolutely. I completely agree. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and break down the episode just like we always do. Give me one word and overall reactions to episode 3 of The Acolyte.
Flashback.
You're the only person I've ever had on the show that won't give their comments until you hear my word. I love that about you. There's so many things to love about you. My word for episode 3 is challenging.
So this was an interesting one. This was a really interesting one. And in terms of chronology, it would be interesting if this had been the first episode that they'd put out.
Yeah, because Star Wars doesn't often do flashbacks. So is there anything you want to add to sort of explaining your word? Because I've got plenty to say about challenging.
Yeah, look, this whole episode is a huge flashback, and we learn an awful lot more about May and Osha and their upbringing and how they were potentially conceived, and a whole load of other things. And it was interesting to see. I enjoyed most of it. There were bits I didn't particularly enjoy, which I'm sure we'll get into. But it really sets up the story well. And I couldn't help thinking, if this had come out first as the very, very first episode and then gone into what was episode 1, you wouldn't have known whether it was, well, you would have assumed it was Osha who was doing the killing.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been a wonderful twist to have seen it with that bit of knowledge. And then when you see the other character, you would be going, what? But they're both dead.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. Obviously it's too late for that, but it was good to get the story of exactly what happened.
This one I put challenging, but I mean that with all the love in my heart. I love this episode. I really do. And I'm so glad that I did. It's challenging because we learn some different ways to look at the Force. The flashback, at first I wasn't sure if that was the way to tell a story, but I'm glad that they did, because now I feel like I've got more emotional buy-in with Osha and May, and some interesting twists seeing all the Jedi together. And you're starting to get an idea of why the first 2 episodes had the direction that they did. So this was a fun one for me, because it really challenged my preconceived notions of the Force and the Jedi. And I love that. I always like to be challenged. I like to think about things that I know in different ways, because I think that helps you to grow. So I learned a lot in this episode, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the reason why I say flashbacks as well is because there's so many links here to the Clone Wars, the Witches of Dathomir.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Bits of Rebels. I mean, there's a lot to like here, and I like the fact that they're telling a story, and it sort of fits into some other things that we've seen, maybe.
Yeah.
and it gives us a glimpse of what's to come as well. So I got a lot out of this. There were a few things I didn't like, as I've said, but there is an awful lot to like.
I agree. Well, let's talk about some of the things that are to like. Tell me, let's focus on things that didn't work at the end. But right now, let's look at the things that did work for you. So just give me one thing that jumps out right away.
One thing that jumps out right away will be the whole witchcraft. I like seeing that. Obviously, we saw that fleshed out a lot in the Clone Wars. So seeing it here makes sense. It's very, very Star Wars as far as I'm concerned. And I like seeing it again. We are seeing a coven of female witches. Obviously, witches you presume are going to be female. But we see this coven of witches, and we see how they grow and how they're trying to find new ways to just find new ways to inhabit the earth and to grow. And it seems from what we learn that there hasn't been any births for many, many years. And May and Osha are born out of some form of witchcraft. That's what I got out of this. And they didn't quite know what to expect. And here we've got these two twins.
Is the mother Mother Corey? Does that sound right?
I think so. Yeah.
I've seen it's been weeks since I've seen it, even though I know this is dropping when the show actually drops. So we get to meet what is in essence the two mothers of the twins. We get to see the girls, as I would guess they're probably, what would you say, they're 10?
I'd say 8, but yeah,
between
maybe
8 and 10?
Between 8 and 10, I guess.
They're younger than us, way younger than us.
Yeah,
by generations, and we see it all on this planet. We learn right away that Osha and May have to go through a ritual, right? The ritual, I think, is interesting because it's sort of like, in Catholicism, it would be like when you were confirmed, or maybe
in Judaism. In Judaism, it's like a B'nai Mitzvah, whether when a girl at 12 and a boy at 13. So it's very, very reminiscent of those sort of things.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I'm glad that you said that. I was hoping that you would so it's like, do I want to follow the ways of our people? And May is all about it. She absolutely wants to be a part of it. She's very, very excited. Osha's really trepidatious. And this is where I get really invested emotionally, because Osha is not feeling the connection to her people. It's not that she doesn't love her people, but she feels sort of like she has a different purpose, or she's pulled in another direction. And I find that to be so compelling and so much more of a real world application. We mentioned, of course, and I've said several times, obviously people know I'm a teacher. That's not a secret. But there are certain times, like for me, it's junior year for high school students. That's when they have to pick their college. That's when they take their SAT or ACT. That's when they have to make a lot of decisions about their future. And you could certainly debate whether it's fair for a 16, 17-year-old to have to make those kind of decisions. But at least you have to give them a direction. Yep. So Osha is really struggling. And while her mother is certainly empathetic to it, she's also very much hoping that she will. But then her other mother, and I can't think of her name at all, she's much more of like a stern guide or mentor for her children. So I like the dynamic between the two. We've certainly seen things like this before, but I like how one is a little bit softer and one is a little bit more stern and maybe even overprotective.
Which is normal. I mean, that's normal in most relationships. You've got one that, it's good, but it's good guy, bad guy, and then one is, more emotionally responsible, and one's more practical. So that's something that we see in everyday life, and that makes complete sense. And that's how you hopefully turn out well-rounded children. That's what you want to do. So I like the fact that they're carefully trying to work out whether this is the right choice for them, and they're questioning it, as they should. I think that's the right thing to do, rather than just to blindly follow whatever their parents are telling them to do. So I liked that. We also learn that the Jedi have created a station here on this planet, and they're not necessarily getting too involved with this coven of witches, but there are 4 Jedi that are stationed here. We don't really know what they're trying to do, although we learn later that putting children or training children or putting children through this ritual is prohibited in the galaxy, and you're not allowed to do that. And the Jedi maybe are suspicious that that's going on. They're not quite sure. And also, Osha is force sensitive, so they obviously feel that. So they're there, not quite sure whether there are children there, not quite sure whether they're being trained, but are just watching over this coven, much to the frustration and annoyance of all the witches.
And this brings up so many interesting conversation pieces. For one, the fact that the Jedi are just sort of saying, we sort of have the monopoly on the Force, but we don't like how you're training them this way. We want to do something different. I think that it's almost like it's voodoo or black magic.
Yeah.
We know that the Force can take on different names, and the mother mentions this several times. Some people call it the Force. It's almost too dismissive of the Force, but maybe that's just the intent of that character. It's not anti-Force. It's not anti-Star Wars, but it almost sort of inadvertently comes across like that to me. But either way, I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is we don't want you practicing this sort of magic because really, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other would smell as sweet. It's magic. It's the Force. It's the same thing. Yep. At least that's the rules of Star Wars that we have so far. So there's that, which is problematic in a really compelling way. But it's also interesting that the Jedi are just saying, "Hey, we want to take over." They say it's your choice, but we really want you to go this. It doesn't really quite feel like a choice. It's almost like they're guilting them into an obligation. Yeah. And that's challenging. It's always been challenging, even in Clone Wars, even in the prequels, the fact that when you're little, because you're good in the Force, we have to take you. Although you leave willingly, as willingly as you can for being a child, I guess. But as a parent, that's a tough one for me. I know it's a tough one for you too. So it causes some interesting debate about what is right. And do the Jedi have the right to sort of invoke their will? I mean, theoretically, they have the safety and the integrity of the galaxy. So I get it. It's a tried and true formula. It's worked for thousands and thousands of years, but it's still problematic. Really, it is. So, and I think that's so interesting.
We know the Jedi to be peacekeepers. I didn't think that they were police because they seem to be, they seem to be acting as police at this point. You're not allowed to do that stuff.
No.
Well, you're there to keep, what do you think is going to happen to these children if they agree to go into this coven? You've got all of these other witches here that don't seem to be doing anything wrong as far as we can see.
No.
So what difference will it make if 2 more join them? And who made you the people to police this?
Right.
Because we've always been told the Jedi are peacekeepers. Mm-hmm. So there's something here that I don't like. I don't like that they're sort of mixing their roles. And whenever we've seen Jedi in peacekeeping roles before in the saga, there's always been the equivalent of the police around to do what they need to do. So whether we're on Coruscant or any other planet, there's always been troopers or other people there to do that job.
Right.
So I don't understand why suddenly it's their responsibility to police what's going on here.
They're overstepping.
Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely overstepping. And I found myself a little squeamish.
Yeah.
The Jedi don't seem super altruistic, even though, again, they have good intentions. And Saul comes across as very heartwarming and very almost avuncular and very warm, right? And he does seem to have good intentions. And Dara seems sort of cold. I don't know if the performance here doesn't quite work as well for me, maybe because she just sort of seems, I don't know, maybe she's just sort of a non-emotional Jedi. And I guess the Jedi aren't supposed to be emotional anyway, but Saul is. Saul's very nurturing and Dara's not.
Yeah. It's good to have her back.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm glad to have Carrie-Anne Moss back. Yeah. But I wanted to see more personality and maybe that's just not the character. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely get that. I think Sol was the one of the four here that really, really shines out.
Yes.
And the other three, obviously one's a Wookiee, so it's a bit difficult to engage in conversation. But nevertheless, I think the performances by the two children here are absolutely fantastic. And they really convey everything that they're trying to do. And it comes across really, really well. There was only one part I sort of lost it, but they had me. They completely had me, those two.
You know what? What is it? What's the part that you've sort of alluded to?
I think on the bridge, when after May set fire to stuff and the bridges are collapsing, I just thought that seemed a bit cartoony, if that's the right word.
What?
It didn't. Yeah, I don't know. It didn't seem true. The acting, maybe the way that the set was designed, there was just something there that I just thought.
When the bridge collapsed, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
It felt a little inauthentic.
Correct. Yeah, agreed.
I agree with that. I caught that too. Well, since we're talking about that, there's a lot of great conversations that probably deserve their own shows in and of themselves between the two mothers. And whereas the one mother, again, I'm so sorry, I don't remember the name, is much more strict and protective, and she doesn't want her children to go with the Jedi. And the mother seems like, because May wants to stay. May wants to stay with her people. Osha feels like she wants to be a Jedi. She deliberately fails the test that we see in the Phantom Menace that Yoda and Mace Windu give to Anakin, where you have to sort of guess what's on the screens. And
right. Yeah.
I love the fact that Osha, she's not a good liar. She's a good person, right? She doesn't feel good about being dishonest. And the fact that she was asked to be dishonest by her people is sort of a sign to her, maybe this isn't for me right now. I think it makes her more dynamic because she's not completely passing judgment on them, because she knows it's not so black and white. There's a lot of gray. The reason she's being asked to lie is so she can stay with her family. Totally makes sense. But it's also like, no, I can't do this. I feel a compulsion to go somewhere else. And I really like that. I think that's so interesting. But here's the thing that did sort of throw me. It's when, Osha she wants to leave, and May says, well, you're not going to leave because I'm going to kill you. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, that escalated quickly. And maybe that just we've seen that there's darkness in her, even as a little kid, but that's like sociopath dark. And I'm not saying it didn't work, and I don't know how else you would have done that, but that really kind of it didn't take me out of it, but it really took me by surprise, and it's just crazy. Wild.
Yeah, I didn't like the way that escalated so quickly. I thought maybe, I remember, this is bizarre, but I remember I was ill with German measles. This is going back many, many, many years. Mm-hmm. And I was laying in bed and I was ill, and my brother was playing with a box of matches in my room, and suddenly there's a small fire in the carpet. I don't know how he did it, but I thought, the sister, she could have just created a small fire, and maybe it just got out of hand, and it didn't need to escalate quite as quickly as it did. She could have said, I don't want you to leave. I really, really want you to stay. I'll do anything to keep you from going.
Right.
And then to have lit the fire, that would have had the same effect, I think.
I think it would have been better if it was an accident. If there was an open flame and she's like moving her arms in this wild gesticulation, I don't want you to go. And then there's the fire. Yeah. But instead of, if you can't, it's almost like, it's a Sith thing. And maybe that's the whole point, James. It's like, if I can't have you, no one will. If you won't stay with me, then you won't go anywhere. I'll take away your freedom and your agency. Yeah. So maybe it's just like she's like Sith potential, but we've seen so much compassion from her in the first two episodes, even when she's committing murder and atrocities. So it's almost like, I don't know, maybe it's just the way it's told. It doesn't work for us, or maybe it's because they're really flawed and dynamic characters. It's too early to know. Yeah. But it is something that I was aware of.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
So what letter grade would you like to give this episode and final thoughts on it?
I'm going to give it an A-. I really liked it. I thought it was done really well. And I liked that they told the backstory. I just wanted... It would just be really interesting, and obviously we'll never find out, but if this was the first episode and then it went into May trying to kill Indira, would that have told a better story? Would we be more invested in the characters at this point, especially in May and Osha? But we'll never know. But I really like the fact that we're going back and we're doing this. This is the second series that's done flashbacks. We had flashbacks in Ahsoka as well. And it worked great there, and I think it works really, really well here.
I agree. You know, it was said once that Star Wars doesn't do flashbacks, but I like this. I'm going to give this one an A. I'm so happy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't, like I said after the first episode, I was like, oh gosh, is this going to work for me? But this is cool. It's again, it challenges my expectations of Star Wars and the Force. I'm still not emotionally invested in any of these Jedi except for Soul. Yeah, I do like Kelnaka, but we hardly get to see him. And there's I just think it's cool seeing the twins as girls helped me to emotionally invest in their characters, because you understand. I always think becoming is more interesting than being, so I like sort of seeing what happens with them and how they get from point A to point B. It was much more interesting and really compelling, again, mythologically. And also, I also love the fact that it raises a lot of questions. It raises more questions than it does answers, and that's when Star Wars is my favorite. Agreed.
Because there's so much here. There's so much more that we want to know about these witches. We want to know about where they are. Are there any links to Dathomir? There's just so many questions that we can ask. Again, when they're walking out of the temple and they're walking over the bodies aren't scarred or don't appear to be burned, and I'm just thinking, they've all just died in a fire, or with rocks falling on them. Wouldn't there be more?
There's got to be more to it, and I'm assuming we'll find out more later.
I mean, unless there's witchcraft involved in what happened,
right?
Which is quite possible.
There's some unknown, and maybe we won't find any answers, and maybe we will. We literally have no idea. We've seen some of the episodes in advance, but we haven't seen past 3 and 4.
Yeah, great.
So, James, as always, an absolute pleasure to have you on Coffee with Kenobi and help me break down The Acolyte. Where can people find you and Jedi News?
So people can find me on Twitter personally at Planet Burns, or X, or whatever you want to call it today. Jedi News is everywhere on social media. You just search for Jedi News Network. And if you want Star Wars news 24/7, 365 days of the year, go to JediNews.com.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.